in the Carter Page situation, the process was deeply flawed. All of the checks, balances, and protections were ignored. And again, this is a FISA warrant against an American citizen. I mean, let's remember, this is not an employee of of one of the foreign countries, an embassy of a foreign country. I mean, this is like legitimately an American citizen. And based on the thinnest of evidence, and as people say, unverified and unverifiable, and that's the challenge. And so a lot of corners were cut in that situation.
Matthew Whitaker, so great to have you on American Thought Leaders.
I'm glad to be here.
And of course, the fist bump, not to be cool,
yes.
But coronavirus is in America now. Better be safe than sorry.
No doubt. And I think we all need to be vigilant and pay attention. I think the government is putting out good information. Saw the president last night. I think in the United States, as an open society, our government does provide us with the truth, unlike other countries like China that they appear to give out information that they believe is helpful to their regime. So it's a much different system we have in the United States, and it's a much better system.
Absolutely, and you served as the acting Attorney General. I believe it was for 3 months.
4 months.
4 months. Don't change you. Okay. Oh gosh, but the news cycle is so quick. It's easy to forget the exact details. Tell me, right now the current Attorney General Barr. Well, actually, first let's talk about this. Right, there appears to be some kind of spat, I guess. The Attorney General wasn't happy with the tweeting. What am I going to do? What do you make of this kind of reality that he's facing?
I think General Barr is the right man at the right time.
Okay.
I really have a lot of faith in him. He was trying to communicate that what's obvious, like if the President of the United States is tweeting about cases, it's not helpful to the Department of Justice and the Attorney General to sort of administer justice. We saw that with the Roger Stone sentencing is a prime example. However, this president is free to do whatever he wants to do. He sits at the top of the executive branch. The Attorney General works for him. And, he even admitted, I think the other day right before he headed to India, he said, I understand what Bill Barr's saying. He's right. I'm just going to, I'm a big boy. I can handle my own, sort of when I tweet and when I don't tweet. So that being said, I think at the end of the day, the Department of Justice is in good hands. You see this whole kerfuffle about Roger Stone's sentencing memorandum and all, sort of everybody wringing their hands. And what ultimately happened? The revised memo that recommended, 3 to 4 years is what the judge gave.
Right.
And not the, excessive 8 or 10 years, whatever the original.
Right. I think it was 9.
Group, whatever the original proposal was, which was outrageous. I mean, again, it was I think everybody who saw that knew that was an excessive proposed sentence. And again, the judge did exactly what a judge should do, and that is pick the appropriate sentence, which is enough but not too much.
So let's talk about the FISA abuse. Okay, we'll use that term. The Horowitz Report came out. Actually, subsequent to the Horowitz Report, we now know that at least 2 of the Carter Page applications were improperly predicated. I think they're still looking at a great many things there. What do you feel? But there's been a lot of debate about the effectiveness of the Horowitz Report and what it actually said. What is your take?
Well, so I worked directly with Horowitz on many of his investigations. I mean, he does not report to the Attorney General, but he keeps the Attorney General advised. And so if you think about all the things that were going on, whether it was the Hillary Clinton email server, whether it was Andy McCabe's leaking, and whether it was sort of FISA abuse, all these things were situations where we were being updated in the Attorney General's office as to where he was, where it was going, what he was finding. He was the one that actually recommended that Andy McCabe had committed, sins that were worth his removal from office. And so, what I make of the whole thing is that in the Carter Page situation, the process was deeply flawed. All of the checks, balances, and protections were ignored. People put their thumb where they shouldn't have, where there should have been good judgment and discretion exercise. They did quite the opposite. And so, I think hopefully, and the question that then, really portends is, do we have a bigger problem than just the Carter Page FISA? Because, at least 2 shouldn't have been issued, and there's some questions whether the first 2 were properly predicated and made enough of a showing, a probable cause showing, to get a FISA warrant. And again, this is a FISA warrant against an American citizen. I mean, let's remember, this is not an employee of of one of the foreign countries, an embassy of a foreign country. I mean, this is like legitimately an American citizen, and based on the thinnest of evidence, and as people say, unverified and unverifiable, and that's the challenge. So a lot of corners were cut in that situation. I think it's going to be very interesting to see Senator Graham's hearings. He's going to bring in 21 witnesses on this subject. I think that's going to be probably the roadmap to maybe where Congress might be able to make some improvements, but I agree with General Barr. Fundamentally, these tools are necessary for what we do at the Department of Justice, and so don't take them away. I think that would be the wrong decision.
Because we've had someone just moments before you who has a different perspective on
and that's
this.
fine. I've been at the Department of Justice in 2 different tours, once as a U.S. attorney and once as chief of staff, and then ultimately acting attorney general. And I know, by and large, FISA is a very important tool. We can look at ways to make it better, but ultimately it is a tool that continues to be relevant and necessary.
So I don't know if you can comment on this, but during your tenure as the acting attorney general, what was your sense of the Department of Justice? There's all this.
Yeah, I have a strong sense. This is a place, we have some of the smartest lawyers and some of the most dedicated public servants in the world. We, the FBI, by and large, the rank and file FBI agents in our field offices, and even, those in Quantico and other places that are doing the important work of the FBI are hardworking Americans. DEA, ATF, U.S. Marshals, our U.S. Attorney's offices, Bureau of Prisons. I mean, by and large, they're great. But there are examples, and we know the names that have already been found out, and there may be others that do not believe in this president's agenda and are working to defeat the president ultimately and his agenda, and that's very dangerous because the leadership of the Department of Justice needs to be able to implement the president's agenda, and that's where I continue to believe that Bill Barr is the right guy to drive this president's agenda. I mean, he said 3 executive orders at the beginning of this administration. It was reduce crime in America. It was to dismantle foreign criminal organizations, and it was to back the men and women in blue because of the morale and what has happened in the Obama administration. And all of those things, we made great strides while I was there, and I know Bill Barr is continuing to do that.
So when we learned that Andrew McCabe, that the DOJ sort of declined to kind of pursue anything with him, that was met with cheers here and a lot of surprised looks and chagrin elsewhere. What do you make of that?
Well, so I was there when this all happened, and ultimately I read the report from the Inspector General on Andy McCabe's behaviors. There were 3 or 4 examples where he had essentially lied. They said lacked candor, but that's lying. And we risk a real challenge here, and that is as if people are charged with lying, and they're only supporters of the president, like we saw with George Papadopoulos, for example. But somebody that's the deputy director and then ultimately the acting director of the FBI isn't charged. I worry about the 2 tiers of justice, and the thing that I can't do is I don't know after I left how they made that decision based on everything I knew before I left. So ultimately, I think this is an area where somebody from the Department of Justice, whether it's the U.S. Attorney in D.C. or the Attorney General or somebody else, the appropriate person, needs to explain kind of how this decision was made. Because I can't explain it. It's that simple.
Okay. That's very interesting. So let's talk about Durham for a moment, okay? Because we know that he was actually conducting a criminal investigation into James Baker as early as 2018, or I think late 2018. Do you think that he was investigating more than that prior to Barr asking him to investigate Crossfire Hurricane? Is that?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with all of that.
Yeah.
I can't talk about some of that.
Okay.
Of what was happening in 2018 with Durham. What I do know is Durham's the right guy to investigate it. My experience with him is his work is complete and exhaustive, and so I think ultimately, he's going to take whatever time and have whatever resources necessary to see what comes to bear in this regard.
So, from what you've seen, what kind of a timeline might that be? Do we have any hints? Because no one seems to know, right?
I keep hearing spring, and I know I've seen flowers sprouting right now, so spring is close. I just don't know. And again, I haven't been at the Department of Justice for just about a year now, and so the good news is that now I don't have the conflict and I can start taking on law cases. But the bad news is I really don't have any. I only know what I read in the paper, and everything that my information is at least a year old. So,
okay, I see. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about China. Obviously we fist pump because of coronavirus in China, but the DOJ has actually taken a much harder look at Chinese, espionage operations. I mean, how much of influence is over that? What did you see during your time?
So I was the one. I was the Attorney General when we arrested the CFO of Huawei, for example.
Right.
And
that's right. That's right.
I think I know a lot about this, and I'm actually on a panel tomorrow morning talking about intellectual property technology in China. And sort of what I know is China is trying to take control of the protocols for 5G and a lot of the protocols for how data is spread around the world. And I think it's very dangerous because their government is oftentimes embedded in their companies. And there's the line between private business and the government is very blurred with the Chinese. So I think there's a lot of risk. I'm very concerned about what the Chinese are doing. And then I also am very concerned about, their goal has always been to be the dominant global economic superpower.
Yes.
It is stated, it's in their plans, and one of the ways they're doing it is by stealing our technology from United States companies. And you saw where one of the main differences in the trade discussions were how much U.S. technologies were protected from the Chinese, and because you used to have to turn over your source code and your technology, diagrams and plans
just
to
the
get Chinese,
in.
just to even compete in that market. So I think that's an area where the president, I think, was right to have that trade dispute and to bring some of those issues to bear. But I think I'm going to take a wait and see approach. I think the Chinese have not changed fundamentally from where they were 2 or 3 years ago. And so, it's one of those things I'm watching very carefully, and I'm pretty pessimistic. I think ultimately we're going to have two systems. I think we're going to have an American and a free world system, and we're going to have a Chinese and its satellite allies system.
Not much hope for reform, in other words.
If China wants to be a first world country and take all advantage of all the benefits that the world offers, especially in the trading and the economic arena, then they need to play by the rules, and I don't see that they're willing to do that.
Matthew Whitaker, such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.